Welcome back to our library. Today we're going to show our complete collection of Sherlock Holmes short stories, first editions. We're going to present The Return of Sherlock Holmes and His Last Beau. Starting with The Return of Sherlock Holmes. This is the first UK edition, published by George Nunez in 1905. It is one of 15,000 copies, priced at 6 shillings. It has a dark blue cover, titled in gilt. After Nunez stopped publishing books in 1906, the remaining sheets went to Smith, Elder and Company. The firm reissued the book in 1907. They continued with the same title page, but with a red cover. This 1907 edition isn't as valuable as the first edition. But this first UK edition could sell up to $5,000 on 8 books. Even damaged copies go for about $1,000. This is a rare book to find in good condition. After the memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, where Sir Arthur Conan Doyle decided to get rid of Sherlock Holmes in The Final Problem, where Moriarty and Sherlock fought in Switzerland at Reichenbach Falls, Sherlock fans in Victorian times had to wait 10 years for the return of Sherlock Holmes. In that time, in 1902, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle published The Hound of the Baskervilles. The time period for The Hound of the Baskervilles is before The Final Problem, where Moriarty and allegedly Sherlock died. The Hound of the Baskervilles is very successful. It was serialized like all the short stories. There were lines a mile long to get a copy of The Strand magazine, which published all of Sherlock Holmes' stories as well as The Hound of the Baskervilles. The Strand and Collier in America paid Sir Arthur Conan Doyle $65,000 to bring back Sherlock Holmes. A huge sum of money for those times. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle brought back Sherlock Holmes in the story The Adventure of the Empty House. Sherlock knows that Moriarty's colleagues are still after him, and he catches his assassin by having a bust of himself stood in the window, and at the same time, he solves another murder. The Return of Sherlock Holmes has 13 short stories. The Adventure of the Empty House, The Adventure of the Norwood Builder, The Adventure of the Dancing Man, The Adventure of the Solitary Cyclist, a very creepy story, The Adventure of the Priory School, The Adventure of Black Peter, The Adventure of Augustus Milverton, The Adventure of the Six Napoleons. An interesting case where busts of Napoleon are being stolen and destroyed. At first thinking it was just someone who lost their mind and hated Napoleon, but then the case escalated to a murder. The reason for destroying these busts was because the culprit, a sculptor, hid a very expensive stolen pearl in one of the 6 busts when the police was chasing him. The stories continue with The Adventure of 3 Students, The Adventure of Golden Pince Nest, The Adventure of Missing 3/4, The Adventures of Abbey Grange, and The Adventures of the Second Stain. Now I'm going to show you His Last Beau. His Last Beau, which follows The Return of Sherlock Holmes, was published by John Murray on October 22nd in 1917. This is the first UK edition. It's preceded by the novel The Valley of Fear and followed by the casebook of Sherlock Holmes. It includes a preface by John H. Watson and has 8 stories, starting with The Adventure of Wisteria Lodge, which starts with a man come to Sherlock Holmes because he wakes up in a house of a friend's that's completely empty. Then it turns out his friend was brutally murdered. Strayed artifacts are found in the house. A very scary man is seen in the window by police, and of course, Sherlock Holmes solves the case. The Adventure of the Cardboard Box, which was set to be published in Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, because a finger is cut off and sent in the mail in the story, and Jack the Ripper stories were still fresh in Victorian society's mind. So Sir Arthur Conan Doyle published it in The Last Bow. The rest of the stories are The Adventures of the Red Circle, The Adventures of Bruce Partington Plans, The Adventures of the Dying Detective, The Adventures of Lady Frances Carfax, and The Adventures of the Devil's Foot, where a woman was found dead and her brothers in the same room lost their minds. They had very scared expressions on their face, but it turned out to be poison that was burned. This is a story that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle really liked. And the final story in the book is His Last Bow, The War Service of Sherlock Holmes, a spy story. We were able to collect all 56 of Sherlock Holmes, which we've presented in various videos. We did not present them in order of which they were published, as we were collecting them out of order as they came out to be how we can afford them, as well as getting them in the conditions that we'd like. Now I'm going to get the books and show all of the books to you again. Starting with The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Then The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. The Return of Sherlock Holmes. And His Last Bow. Collecting these editions, as well as the casebook of Sherlock Holmes. Collecting these editions is very difficult and extremely expensive. All our books are from Sotheby's and flown in from London. Now I understand, with speaking with other collectors, why it's so difficult to collect these first editions, and many collectors will collect books about Sherlock Holmes instead. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle stopped writing the Sherlock Holmes stories in the casebook of Sherlock Holmes and died a few years later. In the casebook, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote a goodbye to Sherlock Holmes, which I'll read now. I had fully determined at the conclusion of the memoirs to bring Holmes to an end, as I felt that my literary energy should not be directed too much into one channel. That pale, clear-cut face and loose-limbed figure were taking up an undue share of my imagination. I did the deed, but fortunately no coroner had pronounced upon the remains, and so, after a long interval, it was not difficult for me to respond to the flattering demand and to explain my rash act away. I have never regretted it, for I have not in actual practice found that these lighter sketches have prevented me from exploring and finding my limitations in such varied branches of literature as history, poetry, historical knowledge, psychic research, and the drama. Had Holmes never existed, I could not have done more, though he may perhaps have stood a little in the way of the recognition of my more serious literary work. And so, reader, farewell to Sherlock Holmes. I thank you for your past constancy and can but hope that some return has been made in the shape of that distraction from the worries of life and stimulating change of thought which can only be found in the fairy kingdom of romance. Arthur Conan Doyle. Since we are such avid collectors of Sherlock Holmes books, we're planning to go to Switzerland, to the Rockenbach Falls in Mering, Switzerland, which has the falls where Moriarty and Sherlock Holmes had fought. There's also a museum there. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle visited Switzerland many times, especially when writing The Final Problem. In the future, we'd love to present, besides for these 56 short stories, Conan Doyle wrote 4 novels. The Study in Scarlet, where actually Sherlock and Watson meet, The Sign of 4, The Hound of the Baskervilles, and The Valley of Fear. Thank you very much. And we're planning for our beautiful limited first editions and having some more videos. So please subscribe to our channel and like us.